Yeah, I was actually thinking earlier today, what if Tolkien had been alive at the same time as games like this and role-playing games? Would he have become a game writer?
I know. Oh, that's a really
smart.
good.
Think of all
That's
the
a good
world building he could have
question.
done.
Yeah,
That's right.
It is really interesting, because, like, of course, the knee-jerk reaction, people want to be like, oh, no, Tolkien was like a snooty Oxford Don. There's no way he would have been. But you know what? Snooty Oxford Dons didn't write really long novels about orcs and
That's
elves
right.
either.
Yeah.
I mean,
They sure didn't.
it's I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. Of course, I mean, I wouldn't really want to predict either way, and it's hard to guess, Because, I mean, of course, anytime you're asking a question like that, anytime you're asking, like, if Tolkien were alive today, what would he think? And what you're really saying is, like, if Tolkien lived in a completely different context and had totally different life experiences, what would he do? In which case, you're really asking, if Tolkien were a different person, what would he be like? And it's not an answerable question. But nevertheless...
RPGs might not have existed if he hadn't come first.
No, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it would be like that Ray Bradbury story, right? You bring Tolkien forward to see how he would respond to role-playing fantasy games, and you just end up making all the role-playing fantasy games disappear.
Yep.
Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, there are so many ways in which I find Tolkien's own, sort of creative intellect. The way that he engaged with stuff, the way that he did. Well, I mean, like, as I talked about in my Myth Moot talk, the way that basically his own mind went, instead of towards doing analysis, towards doing fan fiction, essentially. Like, I'm not just gonna read and to like write about the Volsunga saga. I'm gonna write my own version of the Legend of Sigurd. That kind of impulse, it's hard for me not to think that impulse is related to the impulse that leads people to do role-playing, Like, I don't just want to read the story, I want to participate in the story. I want to make I want to kind of live my own imagined life within the story. That's exactly what Tolkien did with a lot of his more scholarly works, like the Legend of Sigurd and Gudrun, like the Fall of Arthur, and even of course so many elements of the Lord of the Rings. So, I mean, it's hard for me to totally rule it out, but of course it's not really possible totally satisfactorily to
We talked
answer.
about the Ales and Tales that we're going to do on February 16th. I want to let folks know that this Friday we're going to be doing the first of just a few epilogue episodes of Riddles in the Dark, where we're going to go through the riddles and decide what's right and wrong. And then also on Saturday, live, and then I guess Monday it comes out actually as a podcast, right, Andang?
Yep.
Is Corey and I are going to be guests on LOTRO Players News with Braxwolf and Andang and Draculetta and Pineleaf, and we're just going to have a fun time with those guys.
Yeah.
So I can't think of anything else. We're still in the midst of voting for the Mythgard Academy classes, so that's all I can think of. Anyway, so I just wanted to let folks know what's coming up. Oh. And one other thing, I guess, Corey, we could mention is that we're working with Pineleaf to include skirmishes in our Mythgard Mondays.
Yeah, we mentioned that last time, and that's we're getting closer to schedule on that. Do we have a date for our first skirmish night?
No, I needed to get in touch with him, and I haven't sent him an email yet. I was hoping maybe he might be free next Monday, so it may be as early as next Monday.
Okay, well, let's talk about Annuminas. Well, we've already said almost everything there is to say about Annuminas, because we know almost nothing about it. Okay, here are the things we know about Annuminas. Annuminas was the capital of Arnor. Now, of course, there's the popular misconception about this is like about the relationship between Fornost and Arnor. We talked about this a little bit before, or between Fornost and Annuminas. We talked about this a little bit before when we talked about Fornost. That Fornost was the capital of Arthedain, but Annuminas was the capital city of the greater kingdom of Arnor as it stands. But the thing that I want to kind of emphasize about it is not what we know, because again, it's not much. Elendil apparently built Annuminas. He founded the North Kingdom and set up the city of Annuminas, the city of the kings. The Western Tower as it stands way off in the west there of Arnor. But the main thing I want to talk about is the map and what we can deduce from the map. So I would ask everybody in game to go to your map. Go to your map and right-click out until you get to the map of Eriador. And of course, this map is pretty rough. There's not a lot of detail in the overall Eriador map because it's just designed to bring you into the different regions. But even this map gives a reasonable idea of the kind of thing that I'm really interested in thinking about Evendim and Annuminas in particular. And that is, why on earth did Elendil build his capital city on the southern shores of Lake Evendim in the way that he did? When you look at the map, when you look at the Eriador map as it appears in the books, even when you look at the map as it appears in the game, Evendim is kind of in the middle of nowhere. There's like no point to Annuminas, strategically speaking. Fornost is in a strategic place. In the game map, it looks even more strategic than it is, but of course we know that Fornost is, Fornost itself doesn't actually appear in the map. You can kind of see the spot where it would be north of Bree on the Northway. The significance of Bree is obvious because of the place of the crossing of the ancient roads. You can, there's the general, you've got Linden in the west on the shore, where, of course, back in Elendil's day, you had Gil-galad, the last High King of the Noldor, living out there. You had Rivendell off by under the mountains. So in the extreme east and extreme west of Eriador, you've got these two great elvish capitals. Then you have this big open land in the middle. Now remember, Angmar wasn't really a thing yet when Elendil was there. Angmar arose during the Third Age, because that was, of course, like what the Witch King was doing with himself after the fall of. He was there in the Second Age, and it was coming, but it was it was creeping up, and it was it was influencing Rhudaur and everything over there in the east. But before the divide, before any of these things, like what was Elendil's plan for Arnor? And especially, if you can think of the overall, again, like you right-click out once more to the whole big map of Middle-earth, and look at the North and, where the North and South Kingdom would be. And on the big map of Middle-earth in-game, you've got Linden, which is nice. I like how they have that name on the map, though they never use that name in game or on any of the smaller maps. But on the big map, they put the label Linden there over the Arid Luin, off in the far west. So you've got Linden over there. You've got Eriador. Then you've got Gondor down in the bottom. So you imagine this sort of extended area all the way from Gondor, from the west edge of Mordor, all the way up around the corner, south through the gap and up past the mountains through Eriador. That was the kingdom of Elendil. So what does he do? He says, I'm going to put my capital way the heck up here by this pretty lake in a completely non-strategic place. Again, it's not like there's no choke point there. It's not highly defensible. I mean, it's on a lake, but it's not like it's a highly defensible structure or a structure likely to be attacked. It's. I mean, you look at this and it's like, this says retirement home to me. Right? This says like Numenorian lake house.
Sun City, Middle Earth.
Exactly.
A bunch of elves water skiing.
He was thinking ahead for his trade routes on the water. He had an idea.
Yeah, exactly. Because he was hoping to make Annuminas a major mercantile capital of the north. I'm sure that was Elendil's plan all the way along.
Lakefront property is highly lucrative, and
well, exactly. There you go.
Great Evendim Canal.
Yeah. Because all of those great.
How much trade could you have on the Brandywine?
Well, because you do have to have somebody with whom to trade, of course, and that's there's not much there. Because of course, remember the hobbits aren't there when Elendil is starting to build Annuminas. The Shire isn't inhabited until basically after the kingdom's already split. So the king that the hobbits remember in their lore, when the king returns and all of that, was the king of Arthedain, not even the overall king of Arnor, because they didn't really have experience of the overall king of Arnor. But again, you look at the whole thing, and again, at the time of Elendil, Angmar's not really a concern. All you've got is Mordor, way down there in the south and east. And of course they established the defense. Gondor is there, and that's why you have Minas Ithil. To me, I sort of think of the what the three major cities of Elendil and his sons kind of says about their personalities, right? You've got Anarion, who's like, I'm going to build the Tower of the Sun, and he builds it near to Mordor, but like not right up against Mordor. It's like, facing Mordor across this stretch of open and quite pleasant land. And it's in this beautiful mountain location, and it's a very, very strong city and everything. Anarion seems to kind of have his stuff together. And then you've got Isildur, right, who's all like, I'm just going to, like, thumb my nose straight at Sauron and build my castle right there, like, on his mountains, like, in the very pass of the mountains of Mordor, just, like, as a big screw you to Sauron. That's where I'm building my castle. And again, it just sort of seems to me like, oh, and he fell prey to the lure of the ring. Who'd have guessed? Never would have seen that one coming. And then Elendil, what does he do? He's like, no. I hear there's this beautiful lake, like hundreds and hundreds of miles away. Y'all just keep an eye on Sauron down there. Meanwhile, I got some lakefront property that's calling my name up here in North Eriador. Okay. Well, it's cool. But again, I'm not trying to suggest that Elendil was a terrible slacker. What I am trying to suggest is that basically, he was not it's easy to kind of think of Gondor as, the Númenórean kingdom, right? And like we know that Arnor existed, but of course we're more familiar with Gondor because it's the one that's still standing. And we know, we associate Gondor with like this kingdom of vigilance and, this like always on guard against the enemy, and that's why they're here. And the whole story of Elendil seems to kind of point in that direction at times too, right? You've got, Elendil, son of Amandil of Númenor, the great foe, the leader of the faithful and the holdouts who stood against Sauron in Númenor, and now Sauron returns to Middle-earth after the downfall of Númenor, which didn't go exactly quite as he had planned, though it worked out reasonably well, but still, could hardly be called 100% success, in every single measure. But anyway, so he limps his way back to Middle-earth, and is like, that kind of sucked, but I guess it was worth it. And then he's like, well, dang it, if that annoying Patsy Elendil isn't here with his two sons, like knocking on my door. How irritating is that? Especially Isildur, because he's a jerk. So, again, that's sort of one of the main narratives that we get. But again, it's primarily a Gondorian narrative. But when you look at Arnor, when you look at the kingdom of Arnor, and the fact that Elendil had taken that as his central kingdom, that was where he was going to live. That's where he was setting up shop. That doesn't seem to be the way that the primary or exclusive way in which he viewed his kingdom. Arnor was not initially set up as a military kingdom. Again, the capital moves to Fornost after the split, because Fornost is a strategic place. It's right at the top of the North Road, as is dramatically done. And as I've talked about this before when we talked about Fornost, as I think the LOTRO people have done really, really well. That the North Downs is a really important strategic place strategic position to keep enemies from the north from coming down into the Bree land, and that whole area, the Bree land and the Tower Hills, the Weather Hills, I mean, is really kind of the very center, the center of the whole thing, the central battleground, and once that starts happening, once you get the shift and you've got, now we're fighting with the forces of Angmar, and now we're fighting against Rudauer, which has turned its alliance to Angmar, and Cardolin is dying, and everything. Annuminas becomes a complete afterthought at that point. It's because it's sort of strategically irrelevant, and it's interesting to me that the Shire, which is kind of depicted as this like small, tucked away, off in the middle of nowhere, people never even go there or notice anything that's happening there, is like it's like a suburb of Annuminas, practically.
Right.
If Annuminas were still a thriving city, the Shire would be like right on its southern footsteps. Now, the scale of the game really emphasizes this, right? And you walk right from the, how long does it take to walk from like, Brockenborings up into, like the southern reaches of Evendim and pretty close to Annuminas right there? I mean, it's pretty close. You get on a decently fast horse and you can do that in a couple minutes. It's the Shire is,
or a bunny sled.
Well, a bunny sled you can do it in seconds, but that goes without saying, really. What can't you do in a few seconds, distance-wise, on a bunny sled? But anyway, it's to me, though obviously the scale is different in the game, is smaller in the game, but it seems to me that the scale, that scaling down really just kind of draws attention to that geographical fact, which is nevertheless there in Tolkien's maps, that the Shire is quite close to where Annuminas used to be. But nobody even knows it. Nobody even notices it. It's actually kind of fitting that the Shire is kind of considered tucked away, even though it wouldn't have been, during the time of Annuminas, it would hardly have been considered tucked away. But the two of them have never really coincided. So again, I think just the glimpse that even just the geographical positioning of Annuminas would seem to give us of like Elendil's vision for the kingdom of Arnor, being more like a kind of, in some ways more like a kind of Beleriandic kingdom, like we've got the king, Gilgalad is over there by the sea, and Elrond is over there by the mountains, and I'm going to occupy this large land in between, and I'm going to set up a non-warlike but a peaceful domain whose capital city is this beautiful city by the lake, not a capital of war, a capital of defense. He's not going to build the Minas Tirith of the North. He's going to build a lake house. And and that's that, and that I think really says something, and says something even more, I think, about, in a sense, what it meant to Elendil. What the march of Gilgalad and Elendil from the north down into the south meant. It's basically sort of what they were giving up or sort of being willing to sacrifice. They were both really far away from Mordor, and of course they're both foresighted enough to recognize that if they don't act, their beautiful lake houses aren't going to stand forever. But nevertheless, as both Gilgalad and Elendil, of course, enjoying some excellent waterfront property at the time. But nevertheless,
real estate investment.
Oh man, yeah. Well, and of course, like elves and Numenorians are all about the long-term real estate investment, I guess. But anyway.
But the other thing that's interesting is that Aragorn then reinstated Annuminas as the capital, and you could almost say the same sort of thing, because it was at least at the beginning it was not peaceful times, so that's also kind of interesting that Aragorn went back and did that. Yes,
a deliberate declaration of, we're going back not just to, you ask, you think about Faramir, right? When Frodo asks Faramir what he would have, and Faramir's vision of a glorious future includes Minas Tirith restored, right, to its ancient glory. Aragorn's vision for the future goes beyond Minas Tirith restored to its ancient glory, right? His vision goes back to Annuminas restored to its ancient glory, and that means a fundamentally different thing, it seems to me, than Minas Tirith restored to its ancient glory. It goes back a step further in ancientry and to a fundamentally different vision, that vision of, the peaceful realm of Eriador, in which the High King of the Men lives in this beautiful, expansive kingdom nestled between the two great, his two great friends and allies among the elves, and everybody lives together cheerfully and happily, which happened for like a couple years. It totally happened for a very little while there, but of course didn't last very long. So again, and that's the vision that Aragorn returns to. So.
Oh. Is it possible that Elendil was trying to recapture the glory of Numenor by building on the water, kind of like Turgon did with Gondolin?
I wasn't thinking about it in exactly that way, but it's hard to avoid that thought, right? Not that he didn't go quite as whole hog as Turgon did, right? In the sense of like. Turgon was all like, I'm going to build a scale replica of, Tyrion upon Tuna. Okay, it wasn't exactly a scale replica, but his Gondolin was certainly more similar to that than even Dim, I think, really could have been. But yeah, it does seem to be non-coincidental that the Númenórean guy, whom we're told was always longing for Númenor, and was using that seventh Palantir, to look out over the sea to see if he could catch a glimpse of fallen Númenor. You got to think waterfront property meant something a little different to him, especially since his city in Númenor, where he lived, was on the coast. Like it was an island, right? So of course it was on the coast, but still, it was he had lived in a harbor city like that. So yeah, it does seem that there's some very understandable nostalgia involved in the placement of Annuminas in that way. But again, see, it's that kind of thing. Like, let's try to recapture the peace of the ancient kingdom. Let's try to, to build this land of beauty and plenty, rather than the strong tower of war. That seems to be, based on what we can tell, seems to be what Elendil was going for in Annuminas. So,
now, there's also in my mind.
Yeah.
An element of chance in it as well, because when Númenor sank beneath the waves, they were borne upon the giant waves of water towards Middle-earth, and they were just kind of deposited where they were. Elendil to the north and his sons to the south, and they just kind of wandered around for a bit until they found suitable places for building, right? So
right.
There's a bit of that in there as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Which is why I find the original settlements so telling, about the characters of those individuals, especially Isildur, but then secondarily Anarion and Elendil as well. Because you're right. That's where he found himself, and he met Gil-galad, and he, with whom presumably he had corresponded from Númenor, and yeah. So no, there's definitely an element of chance in that. But you can see sort of what they were making of it. He could have, he still could have established something, his capital to be a place more like Fornost, a place of strategic strength. And that would give him the greatest authority over the region, but that doesn't seem to be what he's going for.
Well, I kind of have a thought on that.
Yeah.
He's essentially moved himself away from all the enemies in the world over to this place between two elven people, and so not only does he have at least one mountain range between him and Mordor, he has, the cities he left behind, plus at least one, elf place, depending on the path that Sauron would take. So, in that sense, why bother building a strategic place when there's not that many enemies around in the area at the time?
Right, yeah, no, there's not. The main wars in the Second Age were with the armies of Sauron as they came up from the south. Remember when he marched up from the south and took out Celebrimbor and the elves in Eregion, and then laid siege to Rivendell, and then the Númenóreans came over to help, and and helped to destroy the armies of Sauron at that time. And then we have the Angmar rising, but the Angmar doesn't really rise until the Third Age. So yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it is a relatively peaceful place, and though again, it's still an unknown. It's still a wide and unknown and largely empty place. Empty but not unoccupied. That is, it doesn't. There was Elrond and there was Gil-galad, but there was no, major kingdom, major power center in between those two, and and Eriador is really big. But there were lots of people there. Somebody slightly more aggressively minded could easily have said, like, I shall set up my overlordship here. And Elendil did do that, but again, I think sort of the spirit of it, the kind of the tone of it, seems to me to be kind of indicated by again, he didn't come and establish a fortress, first and foremost. Yeah. Anyway, so we should keep in mind the beautiful, scenic, the icon of peace and harmony and beauty that Annuminas is when we romp around killing things in a few minutes. So, that's the moral of the story tonight. Though again, I actually think that this is something that they captured really, really well. I was interested in what seemed to me the shift, and I think I'm not the only one to notice the shift in emphasis in the game between, say, the North Downs and Evendim, right? Where in the North Downs you're hanging out with, like, Colbert the Mad and his fellow treasure seekers, right? And you're like, hey, treasure hunters, like, let's all go, like, search through Fornos for treasure. Won't that be awesome? And then you get to Evendim, and you're like, you must help us, like, protect the relics from people who would seek treasure in them and take stuff away. And that's one of the primary, sort of narratives of the whole Evendim region. And that really does seem to be a narrative shift between those two regions. But I really like the second narrative a lot better. I think that the way in which the preservation of ancient things is such a dominant sub-narrative through all of the quest chains in Evendim, and especially in Annuminas, and the way in which they have made Annuminas into primarily here a city of tombs, and a site of battle, but again, still not a strategic location, almost like more a symbolic location, and that's certainly why the Dunedain really care about it. And as anybody knows who's played it, and especially as I've been told by people who played it long ago, before they put boats in the picture, Annuminas was never exactly a central. I mean, it's hard to get there to defend it. It involved a lot of swimming. So.
The reason why they used to call it Lake Everswim.
Everswim, exactly. Yes, I've heard stories about Lake Everswim.
Used to call it?
Yeah, those of us who didn't have subscriptions still call it that.
Oh, yes.
I remember doing that swim the long way. It was not pleasant.
That's what I've heard.
It hasn't gotten better.
Yeah, well, it's gotten. I mean, with the boats, it's a little bit.
The boats only work if you have a subscription.
Yes, I know, it's true. But anyway, I quite like swimming, actually. I find it very relaxing. Anyhow, but the point is, again, it's not like Annuminas is this, even in the game, this, like, central location. It's rather a quite obscure location you have to find and travel to laboriously before you can then attempt to rescue it from, the Angmarim who are occupying it. And again, that seems to me to be entirely in keeping with sort of the spirit of Evendim. So,